And as that intro washes over us, we enter into the ramble zone. Rambling here, looking for ideas, talking about ideas with my main man, Joshua Blackburn. How you doing, Captain Jack? Captain Jack. Captain Blackburn.
Captain Jack.
How you doing this morning?
Man, I'm hanging in there. Moving slow.
I know that feeling. I'm not a morning person. Are you typically? I know you're having some insomnia problems, but are you typically a morning person?
Sometimes morning person. I'm like a lot of people I know. Like when I get up consistently early, and kind of meet the day strong, that feels really good. The problem also like being a bit of a night owl, and night owling doesn't create for good strong mornings. So what are you gonna do? Roll with it.
That's like my brother. He's a night owl, but an early morning riser, so he gets about like 3 to 5 hours a night. Well, the thing that it's good to be back on Ramble Source. It's been a little while. I had some interruptions, had some in the new year. Wow, new year brought in a lot of new stuff, but here we are, and wanted to talk about a few things. But the one I talked to you about a couple weeks ago was this idea. I saw this chicken shaming meme thing that was going around, which I thought was pretty funny. But there was one of the, they put little signs on their chickens like, I ate all the rest of the rest of my sister's food or something, just real anthropomorphizing of them chickens.
I'm gonna turn the light on here.
Have you seen that? Have you seen that? It's like a trend or something.
Yeah, let's get
some
light on this.
Let there be light.
All right. It was bothering me.
That's good. But there was one that said, I am bossy and aggressive. If I was a rooster, I'd be called a good leader. And it's like, haha, but it's also indicative of sort of a wider societal message right now that we have different standards for different genders, for females and males, and just as someone who owns chickens has had two different roosters, I feel like that there's something to be said. Like there is a deeper discussion there about gender roles, about society, and maybe even about, I don't know, the excesses that we and the lack of. Well, I don't know. Well, let me get you into this. I'm talking a lot. What do you have to say about that?
I like chickens.
You guys are getting chickens, aren't you?
I like chickens. Yeah. Well, I'm not getting chickens. My daughter Kimeth is getting chickens. At one point we had chickens in the past, and she's decided that she's going to do some 4-H chickens.
Okay.
Raise the little chicks and grow them to a certain size, and I guess they sell off some of the chickens.
Well, that's how we got our original chickens. Is a friend of ours, one of my students, some 4-H, and she had too many chickens, or chickens that were not getting along.
Yeah. Then you have the leftover. You get to keep the leftover chickens, and and she's kind of well, I don't know. Somewhere deep in our DNA is this thing for like
husbandry,
back to the ground, earth kind of stuff.
Shepherds.
Even though we live in town, as we say around here, we live in town. We don't live in the county. We live in town.
In town is a little different than in Tennessee.
Well, and in town is in the city versus out in the county, which is AKA the country, because there is no. It's all country.
Yeah.
Town.
Okay.
So yeah, we're getting chickens. You know, this is the fun thing I think about memes and anthropomorphizing critters.
Yeah.
While I think sometimes it can be very useful, you know, the Proverbs tell us to go to the ant, you know, to learn about industry and perseverance. And certainly there are things that we can learn from our fellow animals. And on the other hand, could it become overly reductionist, simplistic, dare I say, a even category error to compare ourselves, the nature of a human to the nature of a chicken, like cock nature versus man nature. And like, but our, you know, like the behavior of bossiness, the behavior
yeah,
what like aggressive, was that
aggressive and bossy? Yeah,
aggressive and
yeah,
bossy?
yeah.
You know, like if a hen is bossy and and aggressive, what would we call her? You know, like if a woman was bossy and aggressive, what does she get called?
Female dog.
Yeah. And in some sense, you know, like I think this is going to place within our discussions about humanity. Roles actually maybe do us a disservice.
Well, to say more. What do you mean?
Well, because we begin to exclude different virtues from sexes. But what if it is in some context, in some situations, a virtue to be bossy and aggressive, to be agreeable, right? And then if it's absolutely excluded from femininity, what does that ultimately do to women? And I can tell you from clinical experience, it does some really awful things. You know, even like the language of the New Testament, like when it talks about manliness, like gird up your loins, it's often universally applied. You know, when is it okay to? So I mean, I guess just talking from a virtue perspective, you know, when is it okay for a man to be nurturing? Or is it excluded? Right? If a man was absolutely nurturing, we begin to be like, well, how manly is this guy? Like it raises questions. But on the other hand, what happens if a man is absolutely not nurturing? He's a monster. And
well, that's interesting. Useful. What?
I don't know. Just throwing that one out there because
I like that. Well, it reminds me of the difference between my two roosters. My first rooster, Daryl, he was super aggressive. He'd chase my kids around. He was super aggressive. But you know what is interesting is that he couldn't get the hens, and he was really aggressive with them, to the point where the head hen, he busted her down to the bottom, took all her feathers off her neck, and but he was a fighter, man. He took on a possum. That's how he lost his life. Took on a possum, saved the rest of the chickens.
He paid the absolute price.
He did. However, the new one, JJ, way more nurturing, does not chase anybody, is pretty nice guy for the most part. He is way better at all the feathers have grown back, and all my hens, they look way more beautiful. And he gets them back into the roost every night, whereas Daryl could not do that. They were spread to the wind. I don't know how he does it. He's just gentler. He gets them all. He's not aggressive at all, but he keeps them together. He keeps them close to the coop. And actually, that reminds me about what Jordan Peterson said about hierarchies within apes. He said the monsters are not the ones that become the leaders. All they do is cause friction and pick fights. The apes that become the leaders are the ones that can make friends with the female apes and get them sort of on his side. Have a little bit more nurturing. To your point, have a nurturing side to them. It sounds like that's kind of what you're going with
Well,
that.
yeah, and ultimately, I guess I would just my thing is it's complex,
Hmm.
complex, and but at the
Yeah.
same time, we can encounter the world around us, the animal kingdom, shall we say, and learn from it. It's my struggle is often like when anything gets thrown into a meme, it can get like abstracted, absolutized, and at that point, it becomes problematic. Like, the
Yeah.
exception becomes the rule, the accent becomes the theme, the motif. So, yeah. And yeah, what aggressive, bossy,
What?
does it have a like? It does it have a role? Because I think sometimes in our culture at this point in time, sometimes it can in some arenas. Though again, I don't think this is absolute. Um, the call can be for greater inclusion, more collaboration. Um, Anything that's considered aggressive is highly stigmatized. And the problem with
Yeah,
that
on
is
either
like
side. Yeah.
it's impact like because like what's the difference between aggressive and impassioned?
Hmm.
It's very subtle. It's bossy. What's the difference between being bossy and assertive?
Well, yeah, bossy and a leader, right? Because it says if I was a rooster, I'd be called a leader.
Yeah, if I was a rooster, I'd be the leader. Right.
And what's interesting is that there is a pecking order. Is I think you brought up last time we
Yeah,
talked.
there
There,
yeah, in that world, right? In the chicken
yeah.
world, in the chickenness of chickens, the social
Hmm.
order of chickens, just like there is a hierarchy. There is a dominance hierarchy.
Yeah.
And we've called it the pecking order. But
Pecking
think
order.
about how we
Yeah.
even like metaphorically use language like a man is henpecked. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what are he's strutting around like a cock in the barnyard. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Talk of the walk.
Cock of the walk.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's two things where
Yeah,
my mind goes. There's two directions. One is that I think the less comfortable we are and the more we have to survive, the more these roles matter. But for better or for worse, our largesse is what allows us to have fluid gender roles. To that's a hypothesis. Not
that's an
I'm
interesting
sort of
hypothesis.
it's like if we're not starving, we use these little plastic cards to get our food. Just anybody can lift those. We're not hunting, we're
Mm,
not trying to
mm,
survive,
mm,
um and therefore the roles, whereas the chickens are trying to survive, they need their roles. uh the lead, they need one leader. You bring another rooster in there and it gets confusing.
mhm,
uh if one of the chickens rises up and tries to oust or tries to lead, you get chaos. Now, how come there's not is there the same amount of chaos when it comes to leadership in the human world? Well, I mean, it, in a world where in the worst case, everybody in the family is just doing this the whole time, and it doesn't matter that everybody's checked out anyways, right? And that's part of our in a real privileged society, something what is the word I'm looking for, this opulence and the
mm,
ability just to do whatever we want, basically because of how rich we are as a nation and as a world right now. uh, it feels to me as if, especially I thought back to the time during COVID, during the pandemic, when everybody was doing their part by staying home and sitting on the couch, like that there's no need for any, there's no need for any hierarchy in the family when when in order to survive we have to stay on the couch and do Zoom calls, We're, whereas if we're living in a cold climate with no electricity, different story. You still have cooperation, but there's a difference there.
Mm-hmm.
What? It seems like your cogs are turning there.
No, it is fascinating the things that can arise in a culture, in a circumstance. Yeah, when we have a material wealth that no longer requires us to like function the way our bodies are built. I mean, I have this discussion frequently with people with ADHD. That like an ADHD nervous system works really well in a hunter-gatherer society. We're our bodies have not caught up with the craziness that we have created for ourselves.
Say more. What do you mean craziness?
Well, when I say craziness, like we're rapidly inventing technologies that we don't understand. We don't understand, like AI, for instance. We don't really understand how it works. Like the people that are building it, I've talked to some of them. It's fascinating. There are parts of it they don't understand how it functions. It's on an order of complexity to that degree, but it's still a machine. We're creating machines that are creating machines, and but even the fact that like I'm talking to you on my pocket computer, and we don't have, there's a reason why the Amish in some sense are kind of wise. They're like, we're going to hold off and just see how this some of these technologies work out, because maybe it's not good for the human. Begs interesting questions. So but you're raising some things that are fun in the sense of like order, structure, hierarchy on levels of complexity, right? When in the barnyard, when it's a rooster and 8 hens, right, is a little bit of a different, system than, nearly 8 billion people on a rock flying through space. And then even, like the pandemic, that's a really fascinating way to look at it. Is like, yeah, like everyone was doing their part by staying at home, but that's not entirely true. Right? Like there was hierarchy, there was top-down organization, there were segments of society that were deemed mandatory workers, essential workers, fast food work, people making fast food, and the folks at the grocery store, and the folks delivering factories, and everybody in the hospitals, and the EMS folks. Like certain people were considered essential, so but it's a restructuring of society in a way in hindsight. That'd be kind of fun to go back and look at. Systems theory is kind of fun to play with, in the notion that like even as like on orders of complexity within a system, it actually tends to create more of a tendency towards stability. Systems have a tendency towards homeostasis. The system will attempt to hold the system together. It's just a fascinating way things are cosmologically ordered in life. And this is true within our bodies. This is true outside of our bodies. Fun stuff. Network theory does some similar things. Chaos theory plays, with the upside of that.
Well, it's interesting. I'm curious how systems work in like with, because I feel like systems, I think what you're saying is the more chaos, the more systems want to order, to create order. And
systems move towards order always.
Well, do they though?
They
like
do.
In a human system,
even family systems do the same thing.
Well, family systems, but I'm talking about like comfort.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking of like when everybody is, let's say everybody's high on drugs.
Right.
Everybody's high.
And there are families where this is true.
Yeah, that's true. How
Let's just
does
go down the rabbit hole.
what's that?
Let's go down the rabbit hole.
I
I mean,
just thinking
there are
like,
families where everybody's on drugs. They're under the influence.
well, not everybody. Usually in those families, not everybody's on drugs. It's usually one caretaker.
Right. Right. So, right.
But
Like,
I'm talking about when everybody,
yes. Yeah. But
when the
to your point, even in those systems, it's never everybody. There's
yeah,
always going to be grandma or Aunt Susie or
yeah.
Uncle Joe. Right. And
Well,
then
or
there's that
yeah,
one.
actually, usually it's a yeah. I guess that it can be, but usually it's
And there's a
a
parentified
daughter or a
child.
son that steps up. Yeah.
Then there might be a parentified child in there that takes care of mom
Hmm.
and dad when they're passed out on the couch. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the system creates these roles. Because if that parentified child could and they knew how, they'd get as high as a kite. And sometimes they do
Mm,
later in life.
yeah.
Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they stay in that parentified role for the rest of their life.
But it's a
There's
little different though in terms of like a global, like globally in the United States.
yes.
The problem, I do agree with you that
Right.
systems are continue to pervade
Well,
and work, and there is a little bit of, I mean, there needs to be something, there needs to be an impending threat. Systems are like, therefore dealing with threat and dealing with adversity.
mhm.
And the less adversity we have, the less we need systems.
Yeah, I think systems are inherent in the system. Is something I'd probably say. Right. Like there's never an absence of threat because everyone's going to die.
There's never an absence of threat. I know. Well, that is a good point.
Right.
That is actually
There's
something
never
that,
an absence of threat. There's never an absence of
yeah.
pain. There's never an absence of the possibility of instability. So I don't care how affluent we get, it can always be taken away and everyone's anxious about it. Not
Well,
everybody.
here's
I'm
the thing though, is that even though I completely agree with you
well, let's throw the
in one
cock.
sense, it's still a spectrum, you know? Like I feel like, yeah, systems will never go away. They're ingrained in who we are as humans. However, it's a
Yeah.
spectrum of like how pervasive they are, how pronounced they are, and I
But
feel like
there's different systemic organizations. So right, there's iterations of systems depending on in this sense, you're right. Like when do you tend to find a desire or even a need for the strong man, right?
Mhm.
It's why does Winston Churchill rise to the cream as the cream of the top in World War II in England, right? In some sense, maybe that was a historical accident, and maybe that was just the person that the country needed at the time. Now, vice versa, like why is it that Adolf Hitler rises to power in Germany at that time? You know, um, we as human beings, there right in some circumstances might benefit from a top-down authoritarian organization of the system versus something a little bit more flat versus something a little bit more stratified versus something. There's lots of ways to organize the system, and rarely do we get the whiteboard out and do it. Like it's actually this really strange interchange between the system and the environment that happens
It's a
organically,
feedback loop. Yeah.
and it creates feedback loops, right? Like on orders of complexity that are very hard to map.
Mm.
Um, and it's often in the rear view that we can go back and be like, what just happened? We're not we're not intentionally reorganizing the system many times. Now sometimes maybe we attempt to do that, but that would require again like a comprehension of the system in order to influence and perturbate it and change it. I mean that's what we do in family therapy. If
Mm.
people actually practice that or try to do it, is intentionally tweaking a part of the system to get it to disorganize for a minute and then reorganize itself in a way that's overall more productive, more healthy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because even though systems are pervasive and everywhere
Mm-hmm.
and fundamental to humans, they're not necessarily healthy systems. In fact, right? Natural.
Well, see, here's the funny thing. Like in some sense, there's never an absolute healthy system. Neither is there ever an absolutely dysfunctional system, because if it was absolutely dysfunctional, it would be dead and would no longer exist. Right.
Right.
Let's go back to if we look at families, it's
That's
like,
a good point.
does the family that where 3/4 of the family are just like strung out on heroin, does it function? Yes, it does. It functions enough to keep these people alive.
Yeah.
Are
That,
there some things that the system produces that ultimately are deadly?
right. But
And
that
yes,
that
that is also true.
that was the thing about the COVID as a threat, as a system itself, as a virus. It was just deadly enough that it hurt, killed people, but it wasn't deadly enough to burn out. Like anything that's too deadly, right? Anything that doesn't, if it kills, the vice versa is true. Um, if it doesn't, if it's, what was I thinking? So if it doesn't work, if it's unhealthy or if it's broken, it will kill, right? A system.
It will no longer.
It
It will
will
remove itself from existence.
remove itself from existence.
Right.
Yeah. So like,
Gone from the land.
some of these, what's that?
It'll be gone from the land of the living. Right.
Right.
Like
Like
even in
these
a barnyard,
viruses that,
like if the system isn't working, eventually the possums and the hawks, right, will devour the flock, and then the flock will no longer exist. Even when you're down to the solitary chicken, I mean, we're just begging the question here in some sense: is that a flock? All right, is this the final member of the flock, or is that just the solitary chicken? Right? When does the organism that is the flock cease to be? When does, even like you think about it from a family or a tribe, or a nation, right? Like my oldest daughter has gone to the university, as they say in English. She's gone to university, and she texted me wanting some resources on local history. And then she's in some class, and it's like she texted like writing a paper about the mountains and the streams where I grew up, and the indigenous children who are no longer, like, their names for these streams and the mountains no longer exist. They do not exist in human memory. And it was like, this is really sad. And I was like, yeah, it is really sad. And so that way you don't pick up too much white guilt. The Cherokees even acknowledge that the land that they inherited was inhabited by people whose stories they knew they did not know. And if
they didn't even care about.
Well, I think they did, and they created some myths about them, right? These people get remembered, even all the tribes and the languages and the cultures and the dustbin of history, right? Like, pick a country. Do the current inhabitants, are they actually the people that have always lived there? In rare occasions, there might be some, but many are not, right? Like my beloved England, even though I've never been to visit, I do love it. I'm a bit of an Anglophile. And the quote unquote, like, no one, like, if you dig down through the dustbin of English history, you've got to dig deep to find the original inhabitants. And even they, right, when they dig up arrowheads, they call them fairy stones.
Interesting.
Because it's so long in the culture, so far back in the cultural memory, we don't remember who these people are. Because between the Normans, the Vikings, and the Angles and the Saxons and whoever else invaded that tiny little island. So those were systems that fell like they're no longer here. And yet they are kind of here. Like we're all pulled together from the dustbin of history. But like I told my daughter, I was like, it is all very sad. And the land endures.
Well, it's that reminds me of, what's that?
The land doesn't need a name. The land endures. Like there's a broader system at play here in which we find ourselves that is quite marvelous and wonderful, and voiceless in some respects, but also overflowing with meaning.
Well, it reminds me of like the human body.
Yes.
All our cells, the cells that were present when I was born are no longer present.
It's a fun Theseus kind of problem, isn't it? Like, is Judah still if Judah replaces all of his cells every 7 years, is he still Judah?
Right.
And but think about all of the organisms that live on your skin and inside of your body that aren't you, that are essential for you to be you.
Right. And not essential for me to know anything about them, for me to be me. Right.
That is also true.
I don't need to know their names, their functions, their system. I don't, like, for centuries we didn't even know they existed.
Yes. Right. They have silently been giving all of these long centuries.
Yeah.
To the project of humanity. The trillions of zillions of,
well, I guess as a Christian, do we believe in a healthy system? Do we believe in an archetypal healthy system? One system to rule them all. I mean, is there? So I guess the question for me, and of course we can't, we'll never know, or we will know one day, but not today, hopefully, is whether or not this organic existence will continue to keep going in eternity. Will we keep? We know that we'll keep growing because it says his kingdom will increase forever. However, it's interesting to think about whether or not how much God just steps back and lets things, or shapes things or lets things develop.
Not possible. He can't step. There's no place to which he could step back. There's no stepping back. There is no watchmaker.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's nothing he can't do.
Let me address the question in a way that I think, at least I would talk about it. I think some people really long for some kind of earthly system, some kind of like template for placing on creation so we can master it. However, I would state that in a fallen world, that's just simply not possible. Do I think there is one system that rules them all? Yes. And Jesus calls it the kingdom of heaven. But he says a lot of interesting things about this kingdom. In fact, most of the time, he talks so indirectly about this kingdom, he uses stories to explain what it is and what it isn't. And this present world is going to get this present cosmological order is going to be so radically transformed. Like, this to me is the eschatological hope. This stuff is really marvelous and wonderful, and it produces life in a way that is beyond like our conception. We cannot even begin to imagine, rationalize, abstract what this thing is that we're experiencing. And it is also at the same time going to kill you. It is plotting your demise and disintegration. This is the fallen world. This is the last enemy is death. And trust me, it is going to take you and me out. And there is this is going back to something we said before, a lot of people focus on the crucifixion, and the crucifixion is very important. But the ascension of Christ into heaven and the resurrection of him out of the grave, that he trampled on death. He's overturned the entire cosmological order, and that is the very beginning of the end. Light shone forth from the tomb. Death could not hold him down.
Man.
Okay. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm looking forward to it. So, yeah.
Well, but how are you preparing for it? I guess, how do we as fathers, as husbands, as husbands and fathers, as the roosters, how do we prepare for it?
Yeah. So this is something I've been thinking about because it's a real struggle for me. You know, there, going back to like some of this discussion about virtues, there are three what we often call theological virtues: faith, hope, and love. Okay. Like, and here I am talking about faith and hope. Love is the only virtue that will carry out into the last day, carry beyond the last day. There will be a time where we will no longer need the virtue of hope and faith, because we will see him as he is. Those virtues will be gone. If like Saint Benedict, there's a part in his role that's called the Instrument of Good Works, and it was really fascinating the last time I read it. And he takes this notion of these virtues is like, these were tools that Christ gave you to use during your life, and you will turn them in at the end. And the question becomes, how did you use the tools? Right? Like if there's an aspect of judgment, and there is, like, how did you use the tools that God gave you during life? But like, how are we preparing ourselves? It's this virtue of love that I'm really fascinated about here lately, because I realize I'm not a very loving person. And it's the only virtue, it is the only virtue that survives into eternity. At least the way some things are conceptual. Right? From the notion of like a way of being, right? If God is love, it's if we use virtue language, it's not the outcome, it's the process, it's the way, it's right. And hope, there's a way in which of the hope works, right? Like, if you have expectations about a surgery, like we've done studies, it's fascinating. Hopeful patients do better.
Yeah.
Faith-filled people heal faster, right? But there'll come a time where we won't need that.
That's fascinating.
So, but love starts now.
Yeah.
And if we read the New Testament in particular, and the Old Testament, going back to, it's like the demands of love are deep and high.
Yeah.
Astoundingly so.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking. One of the guys I've had on the Ramble Source is Mike Elias, and he talks about the virtues of love over intelligence, over problem solving skills, and how love is a much more powerful mechanism for anything that we can control or manipulate with intelligence. Love is a much quicker, much more powerful instrument of affecting life, reality.
I mean, scientific knowledge is very useful, don't get me wrong, and I would agree with Michael, right? Like and what scientific knowledge used without love leads to death.
Ooh, scientific knowledge without love leads to death. So, like, reductionist type direction goes down, kind of, is what you're saying?
Well, I mean, just that's kind of a broad statement, but I think I may stick to it. Right? Like,
just kind of came to you just now.
Problem solving. I mean, the problem solving mind, right? It looks for a solution, and I often tell this to clients when they say things like, "I'm a problem," or "That person is a problem," and my response is always and very strongly, "No one is a problem," because if a person is a problem, then there's a solution. And the Nazis had a thing called a solution for people, and that was bad. And everyone acknowledges that the solution for people is a bad solution. As soon as you objectify an other, aka use scientific approach to people, to persons, they become problems. How do you solve people? Eugenics, mass murder, incarceration, coercion, violence. Those are the only solutions, quote unquote, to people. from that viewpoint. Maybe, I don't know.
From a scientific viewpoint. And I think
From,
that's what
yeah,
you mean by
like
science is
well,
death.
in science,
Yeah.
you know, it's a very useful tool, but when it's
Well,
universally applied, like when we become instead of being scientists, we are, you know, worshipers of the god of scientism, and begin to use that approach universally. Absolutely, it becomes problematic and becomes deadly.
yeah. Well, it's my dad said about science. He said, which kind of blew my mind. He said, true knowledge, like real facts, are dead. Like you can't know absolute. You can't. The closer you get to absolute knowledge, the closer you get to death. It has to be dead. Has to be stopped to really know what it is.
Yeah,
Right.
you've got to kill it and dissect it.
Yep. It
Um,
only looks back.
and it's useful. I mean, it's like there is wisdom in that approach.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not the only way.
Right.
And
So
it's
love is a solution to humans. Uh, if a person is a problem, then love is a solution,
yeah.
right?
Well, I mean, I think problem and solution language is there's a resolution there that
Mm,
people are unresolvable
yeah,
because of the nature, because of our nature, because of how we're constituted. We're never finished. We're never
yeah,
complete, right? Like
right.
there's never a finite point. And you know, if there is some finite point, I don't think it's in this life. We have a yearning for some of these things, but I know, like, my takeaway is like, just not everything we yearn for is good, and we
Mm,
begin to institute these projects in an attempt to achieve certain kinds of yearnings, and it often results in death. And I use that
mm,
broadly in a very, you know, kind of um, poetic sense. All right, it doesn't lead to life. It
mhm.
hinders living.
Yeah,
Um, you know, people are always like, I don't want to feel blank. Well, you want to resolve an emotion that's happening inside of your skin, and it's like that's just not
mhm,
going to happen. I get it. Like I don't want very uncomfortable, painful things happening inside of my body either. Um, and some
mhm.
of those things we can change, we can alter them, we can adapt, um, we can modify how our body works in response to some things. And um,
Yeah.
but alas, here we are talking about chickens. Rambling, rumbling and rambling along.
Well, I
You
think
go
it's a
down
good
the
idea. Well, what is the idea that we come back to? I think the final idea, started with chickens. I think it comes back to the idea that love is. I love this idea that you're talking about. Love is the only eternal thing, as opposed to, in contrast to faith and hope. Faith and hope, which we won't need in eternity. Love will continue, and also that what was that thing you said, that science leads to death, and I would even say
oh,
science is death.
I'm going to write that one down. Well, science without love
Is
leads to
death.
death.
Science without love is death.
Leads to death.
But I mean, you could even say that science is death. It's like as soon as you know something, although true science is observation, right? And maybe that's love,
It's
is you're
well, see,
curious about something.
that's the thing. Like there's an aspect of curiosity, wonder,
Hmm.
observation. It in
Yeah,
some types of sciences do require reduction, right? Separation.
yeah,
However, oftentimes it's post-mortem, right? Like I we'll say this. Good science is post-mortem, right? We probably don't
yeah,
need to go along just randomly killing stuff, right? We came across something that was dead and we took it apart.
yeah,
I took
yeah,
apart the tree to learn about treeness. I took apart the rabbit to learn about rabbitness. Like Kenneth
yeah.
was watching a dissection of a pig heart, to learn about heart valves and things like this. Right?
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
that's practical wisdom. It's science.
Yeah,
How do I work? How does this thing go together? And there is an aspect, like it's not outside of the context of death, But I think we can't get around that in this world, in this current construction of matter, because of the way that human beings have made it, because we're the ones responsible for this mess.
Well, we could almost say the idea here is that faith and hope project us forward. Science looks back, and love is the only thing that really works with, that we need in the moment.
Something like that. I mean, again, like science applied with love is loving, right? Like when I go to see my doctor, like it can be very life-giving. It's a balm in an awful place. So and it's a gift, and it's one we've kind of I don't want to belittle like what we've been able to learn. And if Christ enlightens every man that comes into the world, well then I want to give credit to him who enlightens every man that comes into all the humans that come into the world, right? Like this would not be possible apart from he who sits upon the throne and rules over all, but does so in a way that, yes, some people could get confused and believe that he just makes watches and throws them out into the cosmos and to watch and see what happens. Now I tend to think he's much closer than we imagine. He's just real quiet.
Well, we'll talk more about that next time. I do want to talk about the watchmaker theology, but we're out of time.
Heresy. I'm sorry.
Time. Yeah, everything's heresy to you. All right, brother. Well, this is a good conversation. A lot came out of it. Appreciate you, man. It's good to get. I think we need to start meeting regularly. It's a theme that's coming up for me lately. The less contact we have, the more catch up we have to do.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We do a lot. Yeah, we should probably do that more.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, brother. Have a wonderful day, and to everybody who tuned in, thank you, Tori Norquist, for loving the video, and everybody who tuned in and is tuning in now. Thank you, and have a wonderful day. I'm hitting the wrong button. I'm an idiot.